talk about?
Boring. From Kate. You're on the internet saying that, mate.
Yeah, you can just restart, it's all good.
Right, has everyone read it? Confess now, because I will know if you haven't read it.
I think, okay, I had pages missing, I don't know if it was correct.
No, it wasn't. That's why we gave out a new one.
Yeah, but that would be still missing pages.
Was it? Was it?
For me it was. I didn't read it.
I have read it in the same way that students have listened to.
Yeah. I didn't get.
You guys, what's going on?
I read it a while ago.
No.
I have read it, but just not like this week.
Yeah, I was like missing like 10 and 11 and everything like that. Mine were double-sided. So I was missing half of it. I can show you, right here.
No, I believe you. I just am confused by the fact that I gave out a set of new ones that were definitely correct.
Your new one was incorrect for me.
Well, or maybe the new one is the old one.
That was my set.
I don't want to look.
So I was missing half of it.
That was the first set there.
No, this was the good set.
Okay, moving
So,
on.
I read half
Maybe
of it.
someone like got rid of their bad set and gave it to you.
Yeah, they must have.
Oh.
I read what I could, but
Right.
it's a bit confusing.
Yes, not very comprehensive. Congratulations to Hannah and Devon who have actually read it. Right, so to sort of sum up, are you alright, Johanna?
Yeah, no, we go.
Strolling around. To sum up, so it's two different articles from 1973, the first one. So the first bit is, so which pages did you have? The
I had 4 and 5, 8 and 9,
Okay.
12, 13,
Alright.
16, 17, and 20.
Yeah, okay. So lots of stuff about Dr. Suzuki's realisation that all children learn to speak their mother tongue, and that basically what he's talking about in the first page is the growth mindset, isn't it? And the idea that we should not imagine when we look at a young child or a baby that we know how they're going to turn out, because we don't. But it is a very common misconception, sadly still prevalent.
How prevalent is it still?
Although less, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not prevalent in terms of, I don't think people look at young children now and think, I wonder if they're going to be stupid or clever. But I think as soon as there's anything that turns up in school in a way that means they get deemed to be stupid or, delayed or whatever, less intelligent, however the teachers kind of phrase that, there's definitely a sense of like you're always going to be at the bottom of the class then. Or, being written off for being badly behaved rather than like really trying to help them work out what the behaviour is. I haven't worked in classrooms, I have worked in many schools, but my observations in the kind of comings and goings that I have seen in schools are that it very quickly becomes about managing the behaviour rather than about solving the problem, because the schools don't have the resources. So I think while there is a lot of discussion about mindset, particularly in more progressive schools, I think they don't really actually truly teach it, because it would require...
It's parenting, isn't it? It's the same thing as we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean it's parenting, but also it would require a whole different way. If you think about how Suzuki approach could be translated into mainstream education, it's a completely different thing to think like you go into the level that you're at, that you should have a no-fail system, that you take as much time as you need to learn something. Like how can you teach 30 children at a time who are taken from all walks of life? It would require the entire education system to be turned upside down and started again, which, personally I think might be a really good thing, but no one's going to do that. And that's why I think, there are, Montessori schools and other kind of alternative private education schools that do have a much better approach. But,
They can manage it because they've got smaller class sizes.
They've got smaller
more
class sizes, they're
resources.
going to have fewer problems anyway because of the class, the intermix between class problems, you know, poverty and other behavioural and emotional difficulties. You know, basically it's for the privileged few. Whatever that is, it works better. Whatever it works better, it just is not, you can never hold it up against the state system because it's not tested and it's not designed to, you know, it just couldn't work. Yeah, without a whole rethink. So, thoughts please on the description of where it says that from that very day I started to study this problem and observe the practicability of the mother tongue method. Thoughts please.
I thought it was interesting how he basically seemingly handed over the method to other people. He was like, he figured it out and then went to a school and said, these are my ideas, will you try them out? And I quite like that he how he was kind of exposed, like flat packing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting, this thing of the experimental class at Wheel School. Have you all kind of understood that that's not a violin programme?
Mm-hmm.
So that is like definitely not what Dr. Suzuki is famous for, right? And it's kind of interesting that he did that for however long, and that talent education, I don't actually know, this is one of the things that I was going to find out, if the, 3 to, how old are they? 3, 4, 5? Yeah, 3 to 5 year olds, as mentioned on page 6, whether they're still running a school for them that is basically a nursery school rather than a music programme. I don't know if that's still the case or not.
Do you know specifically what he taught, or was it just everything?
So I don't think he was teaching because he wasn't a teacher. I think he employed teachers to use the sort of philosophy of Suzuki approach.
Yeah, you just asked one teacher, I remember.
Yeah. And then in the Talent Education Institute, like his school, they had teachers. Like Mrs. Yano is an educator in this part of the country. And then they kind of expanded.
I think he did list it somewhere, like it
Did
was
he list
like
it in his book? Is it listed in his book? I thought he mentioned English and maths. And
Oh yeah, no, it is listed here.
Yeah.
Where is it? At the bottom of 6 and the top of 7, it is listed what they learn. But what I think is interesting is that he then went on to focus on music and not, not general education. And I thought it was really important on page 4. As a result, I learned that the natural method of teaching a child its mother tongue is a marvellous educational process. It fills the child with enthusiasm. That's the very first point that he says. And I think this is one of the things that we have to keep coming back to, is that thing like we were talking about last week about motivation. That if the student wants to learn, then basically you can get away with anything else. But if the student wants to stop, then you're going to have what could be considered in black and white terms a failure on your hands, because you can't fix anything if they stop. It's like that kind of thing about every there's some football analogy about taking a penalty. Every penalty you don't take is a miss, and like if you do take it, then you might miss or you might actually succeed, but you cannot take it. You cannot get it in without trying. And it's the same thing with the students. Like if the students stop playing the violin, that's it. That's the end of the road for them as violinists. And of course there are lots of other benefits that they can take with them in terms of actually playing the violin. They will not play the violin if they stop playing the violin, obviously. And so I think it's really vital to just keep coming back to that thing about the motivation and finding the joy and the inspiration to play. And I thought it was interesting at the bottom of page 5 how he says no homework was assigned, the knowledge was absorbed to the degree that it became an unconscious effort. So, and no child was ever made to feel inferior. That I think when we think about how this relates to Suzuki practice as we know it, this is where the vast majority of the kind of difference in progression comes, is what happens at home. Like, we are the same teachers with each child, we are also different teachers with each child, but you know, our skills don't vanish or develop according to who's in front of us. And the reason that we have some students who go incredibly slowly and some students who go incredibly fast and many students who go in the middle and quite similar to each other is because of what happens at home or doesn't happen at home. And you know, it's very rare to have a student who hardly does anything, who goes incredibly quickly. Possible, but very rare, and vice versa. Unusual to get someone who practices a lot well and doesn't make good progress.
Yeah, that your question about why it's music, that it's really interesting that music has survived the broader Suzuki mother tongue method philosophy.
Well, I think that's what he chose to focus on rather than anything else. But I mean, I did kind of find it interesting at the end of the second one, how he says, I've already spent 40 years exerting efforts in this direction, but as a layman I can do very little. Scholars and professional educators with their great influence can exercise great leadership in changing the world. I kind of thought, like, he's clearly such an intelligent man, and he clearly had the resources by that point. Why didn't he become why didn't he become one of the people that was able to make those changes?
But he was.
But he
was.
Well, he wasn't, in terms of, like, he didn't go into mainstream education.
And that might be the reason why, is that he would have had to be respected by them as a colleague, as an equal. He would have had to have had the background that they had and come through the same system as that. Him being a qualified, thinking of, say, Sherlock Holmes, who considered himself to be a gifted amateur, it's like you're still an amateur, you're not considered a professional unless you've got the job with the title. And those people in those positions of power don't want to listen to you.
Unless he studied to do it.
Well, he wasn't
that's
a politician, but he was.
No, not a politician. But he could have gone to university and, you know, I just think it's interesting that he didn't. That he chose the music thing. But I guess what I'm really questioning is, one of the reasons I think it's interesting is why are these two, which have ostensibly very little to do with music, on the reading list, and there's so much that's not on the reading list. Like, it's interesting to kind of, I guess maybe it's to make sure that we're really talking about the philosophy, which I feel we do talk about a lot. But, you know, these are the bits of his writings that kind of didn't take off and didn't turn into his whole career because he chose the music path.
Maybe it's just to make us think that even though we're using this through music, it is a wider concept. It is a full educational system. It's not just to do with the instrument.
Yeah.
And to remind parents and the child you can use these tactics wherever you go.
And also remind us that we should be striving to, like, improve broader education. It isn't just the people who are privileged enough to do music outside of school.
Yeah.
Because even if, like, we can offer it to underprivileged people, that we can't export out of places that don't offer bursaries.
Yeah.
And we only have that because we sold the building. That's the bursary LSG money, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it only can work in London. So how do you get it into mainstream education in a format that would work without parents, basically?
And I mean, I'm not criticising him for his decision to become a music pedagogue. Like, that's exactly what I've done with my life. I'm not sitting here going like, well, why didn't he go into education to change the world through that? Because that's exactly what someone could say to me. But I just think it's interesting that these are the readings that we're having, and that you know, he did like, obviously music was his passion, so he chose that. You know, if you're going to choose something to follow, that's what he did. And that.
But I don't think there's much difference between an expert Suzuki teacher and someone who's studied at Cambridge and done PhDs. In fact, I think expert Suzuki teacher qualified through experience a lot more, and you know, hopefully are looking beyond it. It's the fact that we have idiot politicians who aren't in power for long enough to implement anything and whatever, and could you be in the politics side of education and be a Suzuki teacher? Because otherwise you don't have any, academics don't have any power really, other than teaching people, which we're already doing.
So parents, the parents asking questions and yanking the chains in that way would be the quickest way to get change. Maybe that's what he was trying to achieve. So actually, if you get enough parents who think, why aren't we doing this in classrooms? Why aren't we doing this in schools? And using it as a more thorough method of education. Maybe that's the reason why he chose that. That revolution needs to come from home and branch out.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you could say in a very broad scheme, the broad sense that the whole academies thing of like taking private investment and going into very underprivileged areas and having really long days for those kids, so that the homework element isn't where the distance grows between the cans and the don'ts or can'ts, and that as a kind of educational idea is completely revolutionary, and there are hundreds of thousands of children who are getting A levels that they would not have had 20 years ago, but it does come with other problems. But in some ways it's not the growth mindset as such, but it is a care. It is demonstrating a care and an investment into people who've previously been allowed to just kind of drop out and fester and just go to prison. Anyway.
Tolstoy also, who Suzuki was influenced by, did experimental teaching.
Oh, interesting.
And I think for quite a long time, it was before he wrote his big novels. And his main question was how do we educate children without being didactic? So without saying this is the way you need to see the world, but in anticipation of a changed world by the time they're adults, and giving them the resources to make the best decisions in a new context that we can't foresee. And also, obviously, Tolstoy was like peace activist stuff, but it was trying to kind of break away from an old school conservative mindset into a kind of seeing the world for what it is and reacting to it.
Yeah, I mean, any discussion about education is always fascinating, isn't it? So I appreciate that these readings are there for that as well. Any thoughts on the next few pages of this one? I mean, what are the things that you think are being reinforced in this article that are directly influencing the Suzuki approach? Let's have one each, Jo.
In that first article?
Yeah.
This bit on page 10 where it says, he made sure that every child understood the material and made no mistakes, I think is the key point, because if you understand it, you can go through it again yourself, and it empowers the child to be confident in that knowledge. So I think that one.
And how would you say that corresponds to teaching the violin specifically?
That if you understand why we're doing certain things, even if it's where your knowledge is, those small sections, and you can do it confidently, it gives you confidence in the next step. So it's cumulative.
Yeah.
But the foundation it's built on will always be there, and putting that through into other methods of education, like when you know something and you've tested it, you know it and you can apply it, and that whole ethos is something
and it's
everywhere else.
It's the thing about taking it step by step, isn't it? To make sure that you don't overload the child and their parents with things that they haven't mastered, like that you master each step before you take the next step. And by mastery, you mean that you fully understand it and you can do it, not necessarily that you couldn't possibly get it wrong ever again, but that you're confident on it, and then you look at the next thing. Good. Devin, what do you take from this?
Maybe it's the same thing, but like what you were saying earlier about the curves and
keep going.
just that, you know, it's a method that keeps people motivated and stops kids from thinking, I can't do this.
Excellent. Yeah, so the no fail thing, that, you know, even if you're in a challenging part, you know that you're going to get through it because you've done it before and you have that confidence. Good. Get out of the pages you did read. What's in there that
Well, it was the one that the girl couldn't even count to 3.
yeah.
And then with his method, she was able to, when she got to fourth grade or whichever, she was kind of normal.
Yeah.
And you kind of see it, and then just the method, it just made her kind of be like the rest of everyone else. Everyone different.
Yeah, that because she was delayed at the start didn't mean that she was left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Just looking at page 11, he says, is that what I wanted to say? That the Western classical music wasn't a thing in Japan, basically, and the Suzuki method made them have some of the leading players of Western classical music, and that just the idea that it can work so well in such a targeted area, and that could be applied actually in other, even if you're just thinking violin music, but if you want to kind of help a tradition that's not thriving. I had a Uyghur family who had to move out of London, but for instance, like you could help develop an amazing musical programs with the same method for other music.
Yeah, definitely.
And this just hasn't been done properly yet. Like the Irish trad, the trad it's seen in London for kids is 0.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I thought the other thing that I thought when I read that first article again, unfortunately this is at the top of 6, unfortunately this class had to be abandoned after some 4 years. The principal, Kamijo, died and his successor had no belief in or sympathy with the experiment despite the urgent pleas of the parents and the children alike. The group was broken up, blah blah blah. And I just thought, like, wow, that's 60 years ago in a different continent, and it's still the same problem that, you know, some of our most successful music programs in primary schools have just been closed down by new heads who are like, no, they can't miss school. Like, the 30 minutes a week out of class time just doesn't seem worth it to them, for the fact that then, you know, age 12 they might be playing violin concertos, like it's just not recognised as something that's worthwhile. So, same old problems. Good, the law of ability. I mean, I think this is something that I know we have talked a lot about, you know, how you can develop ability, and so I think this is probably, you know, more of the same in a certain way.
Is your last page 17 this way?
No, 20.
I kind of retrieved it unfinished.
Oh dear. Maybe Kate's got some spare pages. I'll make sure that you have the full one. The last page is the one with the piano.
No, I don't have it
cello.
right here.
That one.
Oh no, I have it in here. But not in the other one.
The bottom. Hang on, which of those is?
This is the good version.
That's the good one. Okay, the bottom page of that is one of the pages. No, yeah, but in your spares.
What about what?
The last page, that one.
Yeah.
Should I take that?
There's a page that Hannah doesn't have.
Oh,
Yeah, but I'm still missing one.
18 and 19.
Yeah.
She doesn't have
Well,
one.
can I pick something else up there?
Okay, so the law of ability. So there's lots of stuff that we have talked about a lot. I do think that on page 17, some children are brought up by parents who seem to believe that the proper way to raise them is by a regime of persistent scolding and bullying. In accordance with the law of ability, the children develop their own ability to be scolded and therefore develop resistance. It is a frightening thing. The eventual outcome causes the parents to wonder why their child was born so obstinate. Of course the child was not born so, it has developed its own ability to be obstinate.
What
So,
is obstinately?
sticking to your,
Studies.
not being flexible. And I guess, that is going back to the conversations about more difficult families that we saw this morning. One of the things that parents, for example, who don't do what the teacher asks and who consistently change their practice to what they think would be better, are teaching their children to disrespect the teacher, teaching their children that they will know better or that their parent knows better. And similarly, like here we have the appalling and also kind of darkly comic position of a child hitting another child in group and getting asked to be taken out, but the teacher asked the parent to take the child out, and I was walking out the toilet and I came down the corridor and saw this parent hitting their child going, "We do not hit children in class," and I was just like, oh my god. And so like all of those kind of, when you see parents shouting at the children, like, yeah, what are we teaching? This is why most people who are parents now don't think that physically punishing your child is a good idea, because we know that when we smack a child, what you're teaching them to do is smack someone. You're not teaching them not to smack someone. You're teaching them that is what you do when you're angry. And all of these kind of problems, so many, obviously problems in behaviour in children, so many of them can be tracked right back to the environment at home. And to the point where, I've kind of like tongue-in-cheek have this phrase, parent-induced special needs, because some of the time the children have no special needs whatsoever. But it literally is, they have learned how to behave like someone with special needs because of the way that they've been parented. And in some of those circumstances we can help a lot, and in other circumstances it's way beyond us. And what I found interesting about the appeal for policy of child development, that this idea that he had that there would be instructors in how to be parents, and that they would go in and kind of help the parents bring up the children right, is basically what he's describing as basically our social care system, but it only kicks in when there's such a problem that social services are called in and that there's a chance that that child might need to be taken away because they're unsafe. And so it's like, what he was kind of imagining was like the top, the kind of that like scaled up to like how can we actually make our country a better country of better humans. And actually what every country has got now, which they didn't have 100 years ago, or every Western country certainly, is a system of safeguarding where if there is a child who's really in danger, or an adult who's in danger from a child, then there is a system of, taking steps to remedying that. Whereas, Victorian times, like, children were just left to do whatever. And, before that, like, having just done that play I was working on about Thomas Coram, like literally women had babies, that they either couldn't afford or out of wedlock, and literally left them on the streets. And that was the whole foundling thing. It's like literally the babies were just on the streets dying around you. And so we have come a long way from that. And if you wanted to have a big conversation, if we want to have a big conversation, maybe we'll do it in the pub later on, but about who would these instructors be and how can you actually unpick class problems and, like you were saying, that didactic, like this is how you raise a child right. Why are the upper classes in most communities considered to be the best way to do it and the lower classes are not? Well, it's because we are in a system of power where the upper classes get to say what's right. The upper classes become the prime ministers and the politicians and the most successful lawyers and judges and doctors, etc., because they get to call the shots. It's not necessarily that their way of doing it is the best way, But, you know, and so like who would, if you were actually going to do this, like if you kind of have a thought experiment of, okay, Dr. Suzuki thought we should do this, what would that actually look like? That's a really interesting kind of thing, like to think, well, so would I be going into it? Would you be going in? Like you would do a lot better parenting than a lot of parents, but you're not a parent. So, you know, like all of those things of like, how do we actually, you know, and the way it conforms to what we are actually doing is like, how do we teach our students to be the kind of people that we hope they want to be without impressing upon them some sort of cultural, ideological colonialism where we say this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to a moral compass, and like, yeah, we do all agree what is right and what is wrong within a very tight circle, and then outside of that, it's up to you and it's up to the parents whether they want to buy into that by coming to you for lessons, basically.
I think here one of the things that is happening, like obviously we've got the parent education thing, but parents do seem to have a lot of time in the lobby area, and there is that kind of, and Marcy is around and she's been a Suzuki parent, and there is that kind of Suzuki parent chat happening.
And I think on a grander scale that also is part of being in a kind of community enterprise type place in East London. Like most of the parents that we have coming here have broadly political views that are similar, feel the same about climate, you know, have very similar concerns to one another. And as you know, as the director of Suzuki Hub, that's one of the things that I try and like not determine, but like shape as a community. Like, yeah, we do have recycling, and we won't have Tory postcards up. You know, if someone brings in the political propaganda. Like, yeah, I will have Labour Party leaflets, and I will have the Greens leaflets, and I will have XR, and I won't have the Tories, because that is, you know, that's part of my privilege, is this is my place, and that's what I think, that's where my moral compass takes me to. Like, I do think being right-wing is wrong, and therefore, you know, and so that's, I think, those are the things that are much easier to kind of negotiate within an organisation, rather than your own personal Suzuki studio. It's much more difficult to have those times for the parents to be hanging out. It's much more difficult to have a sense of kind of
community.
Well, no, I think it's easy to have a sense of community, and I think lots of teachers do that really well. But in terms of like the much more kind of ethereal, political, noble hearts, what does it mean to have a noble heart? What does it mean to be a good citizen? You know, we are able to offer ideas about that partly because of the scale and the geography of the building. Whereas in your own studio, I think it's quite difficult to make the spaces for those conversations to happen.
The way it seems to happen is like parent education evenings, right? Where you'd have like a talk and then everyone chat for a bit.
Yeah. But I mean, most of those, if your parents come and you start talking about politics and climate change, they're surprised. Most of those, you know, it's about how to do practice better, or it's about how to improve your, you know, performance capabilities or whatever. It's not impossible.
I don't know what. Do you know what they do at Auditor? Because they have
the parent talks. Yeah, they're very specific about like Suzuki practice. Yeah.
Practice stuff.
I think we are pretty unique. I'm not entirely sure about this, but I certainly don't know anyone else who has that sort of social justice aspect that is so openly kind of presented as like part of what we are as an organisation, is like pro-queer, anti-racist, you know, social change kind of minded. And I like that. I haven't seen anybody else talk about that to the extent that we do, which I don't think is very much. Like I don't think we do it enough really, but it's certainly kind of more that, you know, most of the discussions within Suzuki are quite sort of at an entry level of like what we're teaching is, for example, politeness. Like every teacher I know pretty much will teach their students to say please and thank you for a sticker or whatever, and you know, work together in a group lesson. So if there's stands that need putting down, everybody will help put the stands down, and just, you know, basically like be kind and be polite and be helpful. I think most Suzuki teachers are very clear that that's part of what they're teaching. But in the meta of how that connects to politics and social justice, that's, you know, way outside of most people's interests like this. You know, I know something that we have in common, but you know, that's a specific thing that I bring here because I think it's really important, rather than you can't separate it from Suzuki, so therefore it's in every Suzuki program.
I do think the thing that I noticed with the climate stuff was like a hugely high proportion of Suzuki people in the small world that I met of like quite extreme activism, and kind of it was like I met 8 people who were either Suzuki parents or Suzuki students out of 40 that I was working with closely. It was a really, really high proportion. I do think like even though I think our parents' generation of teachers and knowing Suzuki must have felt that more strongly than we do today as a Suzuki community, that it was like a peace building educational movement, because he very much was a social justice advocate, and also there was this international thing which was more necessary because it hadn't gone to so many different countries.
It was a post-war era as well, isn't it? So
And
people
post-war,
were looking to forge a new way of doing things and not wanting to repeat twice what happened with the world wars and various other regional wars and stuff. And actually Japan being ravaged in the way that it was like, right, we've got a chance to build. Do we go back to the old, or do we do something going forward? And I think maybe that's what Suzuki was talking about in that first article, where he was saying, at the end of the second one, we were saying, you know, I can't do it. I'm not there. But all these Suzuki children are growing up to join these organisations. He's got a longer term plan, I think.
I think it's possible that it is that it has changed. I think it has changed. You know, it always changes when the founder is no longer around. But I think the other thing that is possibly part of that reason is that because all the teachers are teaching basic like cooperation and kindness, it's not a big jump then to think part of cooperation and kindness for humanity has to be about addressing climate change. And so that maybe what it means is, rather than that generation were taught more kind of didactically about how to be a good person, but that it develops your ability to identify for yourself what you think that is and to follow that through and to become passionate about something. Like, definitely one of the strong benefits of learning an instrument and learning to be a musician more broadly is that you know how to take something from nothing to full tilt, right? We know how to get involved, how to put your energies in, how to work together. You know, if you decide tomorrow, Joe, that you want to put on a theatre production, you may know nothing about theatre, but you certainly know what the process is of educating yourself and bringing people with you and making something happen. And I think that maybe that is part of it as well, is that it's like you feel that confidence of being able to follow through and being able to educate yourself about something new, as well as the kind of justice aspect.
It's quite interesting right now, the debate that's going on because the Suzuki method is quite like peace building and global and stuff like that. But then you have the Russia-Ukraine war, and then there's debate about like, do we ostracize the Russian teachers and to like punish the Russian government somehow, or do we support them and support
it's really
Russian students?
Yeah, I think one of the things I was really off put by when I did the first year of teacher training 5 years ago, not here, was how there's this politeness thing. Everyone's really polite, but to a fault.
Yeah.
Where they'll be so nice to each other that they don't don't give any criticism when it's necessary.
And people don't get called out and stuff.
And people don't get called out and stuff. And then someone said Suzuki's apolitical. It's like there's this like active like.
It's so mad. How can you read Dr. Suzuki's writings and think that he's apolitical? It's just wrong.
And I think the
clearly
reaction to Russia, it's like cancel culture basically. Like the people who were like, let's get rid of them. It's like it's not seeing the nuances of an entire like populations, and also not seeing the kind of healing and change possibilities of what Suzuki is about. It's like you're either bad or you're good, and you have to behave a certain way, otherwise you're bad. It's weirdly unnuanced.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, like many people in this room and many people possibly, if anyone's still watching this online, will know about various experiences I've had with discrimination. But, you know, that's one of the things for me. I was just constantly bashing my head against the wall because I was like, how can we come from a position of every child can and every child should be able to and and then I'm the wrong kind of person, you're the wrong kind of person to do this work. Like, how can the same people be saying that they can form to a Suzuki philosophy and often get really quite culty about the elements of it that aren't philosophical, and yet not call someone out for homophobia or racism, and not like try and not feel a need to, you know, be inclusive and have a very kind of like parochial version of like who should be doing this work. And, you know, I think that those things are, you know, philosophy is a huge subject. Most people are not interested in having philosophical debates, discussions, or even thoughts themselves. They want an easy life, and you know, and that applies to Suzuki teachers just as much as everyone else, and that's fine. Like, you know, it's not that everyone should be trying to emanate Dr. Suzuki in terms of like being deep thinkers about this stuff. But I do think when you get to the stage of what is Suzuki as teaching grade 8 by the age of 12, then you've just completely missed the point. And, you know, I think that the teaching courses that have the space and time to have discussions like this, and where you have someone or people in the position of leadership who are clear what their relationship to Dr. Suzuki's philosophy is, just offer a much more broad and true to his ideals kind of version of Suzuki, where, you know, when you can do a level in 5 days, and, you know, I think particularly in America there are so many teachers who have never had a philosophical discussion about what they're doing, because they've been teaching points, how to play the pieces, and you know, how to break down a skill, and then it just becomes an entirely technical exercise. And Dr. Suzuki was really clear that it wasn't about playing the violin. Like, if what you're after is a really good technical process for your students, then Suzuki can be wonderful for you, but you're not offering what Suzuki meant to offer to his students, to your students. And I think, you know, that's part of something becoming internationally recognised. Of course, people are going to do it different ways. But I certainly hope that one of the things I'm doing on my course is to actually like bring the people that I'm in contact with regularly around to the more difficult sides of like, this is not just how do you teach the violin, this is more than that. And you all individually need to decide what that looks like for you, and I wouldn't tell you that you're doing it wrong, but I do want to make space for conversations like this, because I think they're really important. And I think so much of our lives are just rushed, and, you know, you're just finishing your teaching points for the exam, and then you're just remembering the pieces for the exam, and then you're just thinking about how to teach that student in front of you, and you don't actually make space in yourself for the philosophical side of things. And more crucially, what that leads to is a style of teaching where there's not the space for those discussions between you and your parents and your students as well. And I think, you know, if you have a sense of confidence about the philosophy, that you think, actually, yeah, if we're going to have a 7-minute discussion about the Russia-Ukraine war in a lesson, that's really important. And, you know, it won't happen with every student, but, you know, not to kind of foster that, like, what we do in lessons is you get your violin out, we do 30 minutes of playing, and then you leave. And it's kind of like reflected by that practice thing. It's like, it's important to leave space to make sure that the parents know what they're doing in practice. It's important on a different scale to have space to actually impart the you know, the love of humanity that we're supposed to be imparting. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Okay, good. Well done, everyone. I think, yeah, we might not get through 2 lullabies, but let's get violins out and book 4s out, please.